Welcome back to this new series where we delve into the nature of Iran's defeat by the Byzantines, followed by the invasion of the Arabs. This is a crucial aspect of the context for the origins of Islam. Many Muslims today believe that Islam's overthrow of the two world powers is nothing short of miraculous, and that it even supports Islam's claim as being of divine origin. However, there is a rational explanation for this remarkable reversal of fortune for the Iranians. Parvana Pourshariati, in her book Decline and Fall of the Sasanian Empire, spells out using both long neglected and newly discovered evidence how this unprecedented chain of events occurred. She says, as Sebios' account bears witness, when in 615 the Persians reached Chalcedon, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, 610 to 641, was about ready to become a client of the Sasanian Emperor Khosrow II, 591 to 628. Unexpectedly, however, the tides turned, for in the wake of what has been termed one of the most astonishing reversals of fortune in the annals of war, and after the ultimate defeat of the Sasanians in the last crucial years of the war, 621 to 628 CE, itself a tremendously perplexing question, a socio-political upheaval unprecedented in the world of late antiquity began, the Arab conquest of the Near East. These events were to lead to far worse consequences for the Persians than for the Byzantines. While the event truncated Byzantium beyond recognition by the 640s, its consequences were even more dire for the Sasanians, for with the death of the last Sasanian king, Yazgird III, 632 to 651, in the aftermath of the Arab conquest of Iran, came the end of more than a millennium of Iranian rule in substantial sections of the Near East. This leads us to her most important question regarding the fate of Persia. Why was an empire that was poised for the dominion of the Near East in 620, when successively engaging the powerful Byzantines, utterly defeated by 650 by the forces of a people hitherto under its suzerainty, the Arab armies? She sets out her objectives quite succinctly. This work is an attempt to make sense of this crucial juncture of Iranian and Middle Eastern history. It will seek to explain the success of the Arab conquest of Iran in the early 7th century, as well as the prior defeat of the Sasanians by the Byzantines, with reference to the internal dynamics of late Sasanian history. Most commentators on these events imagine a monolithic and centralized superpower brought low by a band of Arab marauders, but this macroscopic view misses much of the key context of what was going on at the time. She writes that the Sasanian monarchs ruled their realm through a decentralized dynastic system, the backbone of which was the Sasanian-Parthian confederacy. This centralized system was both its strength and its weakness when circumstances changed. It depended on the ready cooperation of the Parthian contingent for its continued success. Unlike many other scholars that shuffle out rehashed and half-baked theories on what occurred, mostly rubber-stamping uncritically the Islamic narrative, Pourshariati has relied painstakingly on a host of sources. She writes, the theses proposed in this work have been formed after an exhaustive investigation and at times re-evaluation of a host of external and internal sources pertaining to this period of Iranian history. Armenian, Greek, Syriac, and classical Islamic histories, especially the Futuh or conquest narratives, have been utilized in a source-critical juxtaposition with literary and primary sources of Sasanian history. The Hawa Day Namag, the Book of Kings, traditions, as they appear in classical Arabic histories, but especially in the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, Middle Persian literature produced in the late antique period of Iranian history, local Iranian histories, and above all, the numismatic and sigillographic evidence of late Sasanian history. I particularly like her use of coins and monarchical seals for building her case, these being the least prone to later narrative revisions. The final picture that is formed is explicitly and irrefutably confirmed by the one corpus of data that suffers the least harm in a people's historiographical production of their history, the primary sources of Sasanian history, the numismatic and sigillographic evidence. The seals in particular bring out a crucial point that, at that juncture in history, the rulers identified themselves first and foremost as either Pahlav or Parsic, i.e. Parthian or Sasanian, which underlines the precarious contingency of their union. There simply was no guarantee that this union would hold. Throughout the Sasanian history, there was a dichotomy between the Parsic, the Sasanians, and the Pahlav, the Parthian, which forced the Sasanians into a confederate arrangement with the powerful Parthian dynastic families living in their domains. As late as the 7th century, some of the dynastic bearers of the seals insist on identifying themselves as either a Pahlav or a Parsic. Indeed, there were a number of families on which this confederacy depended on. This was a predominantly decentralized, and borrowing a term from Cyril Tumanov, a dynastic system of government where, save for brief and unsuccessful attempts at centralization by the Sasanians in the 3rd and 6th centuries, the powerful dynastic Parthian families of the Karans, the Mihrans, the Ishpa-Bhutan, the Surans, the Kanar-Ranriyan were all practical purposes co-partners in rule with the Sasanians. The defeat under the Byzantines played a huge role in the Parthians reconsidering their relationship inside the Parthian-Sasanian Confederacy. This Sasanian-Parthian Confederacy ultimately collapsed, however. The inception of its debacle occurred in the midst of the astonishing reversal of fortune in the annals of war, when the tide turned and the Sasanians suffered their inexplicable defeats of 624 to 628 at the hands of the Byzantines. Had it not been for the Parthians' withdrawal from this union, it is unlikely that they would have lost to the Byzantines. United, they were powerful and impregnable. Separated, they didn't have the wherewithal to put up a successful fight. This is especially true when we think of the strategic advantage of overwhelming numbers in defeating one's enemies, a 3-to-1 advantage being ideal. Had it not been for the Parthian withdrawal from the Sasanian-Parthian Confederacy toward the end of the rule of Khosrow II Parviz 591 to 628, the Byzantines might very well have become a client state of the Sasanians, and Heraclius a son instead of a brother of Khosrow II. The withdrawal of the Parthians on the heels of a protracted war between the Sasanians and Byzantines would have created the ideal opportunity for the Arabs to wage an invasion and seek material advantage at the low point of their division. The debacle of the Sasanian-Parthian Confederacy during the last years of the Sasanian-Byzantine Wars, however, had a far greater consequence for late antique Iranian history: the ultimate defeat of the Sasanians by the Arab armies and the eradication of their empire by the middle of the 7th century. She writes that it was in the immediate aftermath of the final collapse of the Sasanian-Parthian Confederacy, in the wake of Khosrow II's deposition and murder in 628, that the unprecedented chain of events that ultimately led to the total annihilation of the Sasanian monarchy after 4 centuries of rule commenced the early Arab conquests of Sasanian territories. We can immediately see how the year 628 would have been the opportune time for the Arabs to commence their invasion, and yet Islamic sources claim that this didn't occur until 632. She writes that a second central theme of the present study I arrived at through a critical examination of the Futuh narratives in juxtaposition with the Sasanian Hawade Naumag historiography, therefore, is that the early Arab conquest of Iraq took place not as has been conventionally believed in the years 632 to 634, after the accession of the last Sasanian king Yazdegerd III, 632 to 651, to power, but in the period from 628 to 632. The Arabs had a divide and conquer opportunity when, in the aftermath of Khusro II's death, both sides were divided and distracted in their internal dispute about who should lead. The conquest of Iraq occurred precisely during the period of internecine warfare between the Pahlav and the Parsec. The two factions, engrossed in their strife in promoting their own candidates to the throne, were incapable of putting up a united defence against the encroaching Arab armies. The Arab success hinged crucially on the Parthian abandonment of the Sasanians. The subsequent conquest of the Iranian plateau, moreover, was ultimately successful because powerful Parthian dynastic families of the Kust-i Harwarasan quarter of the east and Kust-i Adurbadagan quarter of the north abandoned the last Sasanian king Yazdegerd III, withdrew their support from Sasanian kingship, and made peace with the Arab armies. In exchange, most of these remained de facto power over their territories. Of course, if the invasion of Iran occurred precisely at a time that Muhammad was meant to be alive, why is there silence about his involvement in these conquests? He simply is not mentioned in the available narratives. She writes, the conquest of Iraq is traditionally believed to have occurred after the death of the Prophet in 632 and after the Rida Wars, or the Wars of Apostasy. If Prophet Muhammad was alive according to this newly offered scheme, how then will this affect our traditional understanding of early Islamic history? What of our conventional view of the roles of Abu Bakr and Umar as caliphs in this period of Islamic history? If Muhammad was alive, what of apostasy? We can see that something doesn't add up. Abu Bakr and Umar are mentioned leading these conquests, yet if they occurred during the supposed lifetime of Muhammad, then who really was in charge in this period of 628 to 632? Why have all the battles been placed in the narratives after 632, the year traditionally said to be that of Muhammad's death? To get one's battle dating wrong is careless, but to get all of them wrong, and in the same manner, i.e. post 632, seems like a realignment for some later propaganda purpose. Thank you for watching.